Emerald Podcast Series. Research that makes a difference.
My guest today is Ned Rava, PhD. He's a long-term practitioner of strategic development, having worked in the public and private sectors and for the United Nations, the World Bank and the European Union. He has also developed the Interactive Design Framework, co-founded Features of Social Innovation at the S-Lab, and managed a portfolio at the Joint Fund for Sustainable Development Goals. A link to the book is available in the transcript. Hi Ned, how are you doing today?
Good. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So your book, Platforms Everywhere, Transforming Organisations by Integrating Ecosystems and Business Design, it presents a new comprehensive paradigm for platform businesses and a practical methodology for platforming organisations across sectors and industries. So could you maybe just briefly explain a bit more about platforms in business?
Thank you very much. There is a need for transformative approaches that will be able to address the complexities of the 21st century. And for that, we need a very different, innovative business model that would enable ecosystem entities to co-create value and engage ecosystems in learning and community development. We are seeing increasingly the stakeholders seek to be empowered, and the current models that are applied in businesses, governance, society are simply not adequate. So my main argument in the book is that platform is exactly that new business model that will be able to help us move on. The conventional, or sometimes called pipeline approach to organizing businesses and creating value has been dominant since the Industrial Revolution, and it basically colonized all sectors and industries. But it's simply not able to cope with contemporary challenges, needs, and aspirations. And we see that it's increasingly inefficient, ineffective, and unsustainable in dealing with social and economic complexity. So maybe I should just give you a bit of a background how I came to this. Most of the people who enter in the space of platforms, they come from either digital tech or service design. Some of them come from the space of organizational development, network theory. I've been working in the networked organizations, learning organizations for more than 20 years. And I've experienced that these attempts to bring together distributed actors often fails, or at least it's not durable. So I've been looking for a business model that would basically support networks in establishing solid foundation for actually being businesses, not just occasional communities of practice or some passion projects. And I considered platform to be a candidate for that kind of business model, and have done research that included, really comprehensive analysis of what we know about platforms so far. And what was really shocking is that despite the rhetoric and, platform as a word being used so much, there were no definitions or some sort of a concept that would actually explain what's a platform. So I ended up spending most of my time trying to figure out what's a platform beyond the use of the word in daily contexts. And as I was digging further into this, I realized that we need to go beyond what's currently dominant, which is digital platforms, beyond limiting platforms to data, and beyond the corporate platforms. And soon I realized that platform as a business model is a completely different beast. It's fundamentally different model from what we have since the Industrial Revolution, but that was both a modern business model, but it has also very strong ancient roots. It might have been the first business model that humanity used at the very beginning. So I was going deeper into this, and as I always avoid, standard definitions, too rigid concepts, I ended up with minimum specifications. So elements of any business model that would qualify it for a platform. Again, no standard definitions. And it includes a number of elements, primarily who are the actors, of how the value is being created. And that then led me to realize that we actually are facing fundamentally different business model, which is on par with the industrial pipeline assembly line model, and that it's not just another type of an organization or a business, it's a whole different universe. And that actually opened up new opportunities. And the book is going further into these, proposing concepts, but also methodological approaches, specific practical tools and methods that can help us turn those businesses into platforms.
That's fascinating. Thanks. That's really, really interesting research that you came into. When I read your book, a point quite very early on in the book stuck with me, and that is that platforms do not solve problems, but enable individuals and organizations to do what they want/need when and how they go about it. Could you expand on this a bit, please?
Thank you. So the main reference when we talk about business overall, at least in modern times, is, of course, Peter Drucker. And I use his approach to business models, which he called the theory of the business. And he claimed that the purpose of business is to solve problems for its customers, clients. And that's true for the conventional model, what we tend to call pipelines. So let me just briefly explain the pipeline so that we can see what's different with platforms. So pipeline is basically a linear model that copies the way how factories or assembly lines operate. That's why we sometimes call it industrial model. It's very simple, actually, and that's why it was able to be applied in so many different sectors and industries. It has three main elements. You have input, which is putting certain resources, human resources, financial resources, material resources, into a process, and then this process creates value and produces outputs. And these outputs are supposed to be standardized because we are looking into mass market production. This model worked well in factories, and then this model was applied in basically every sector industry that we have today. So for instance, education, we put people and we put knowledge and we put certain time of professors into the process, which then produces, or at least it's expected to produce, standardized knowledge of those students who then go out and apply it in the market. That works well when you really focus on efficiency, when you focus on mass market. However, when you are engaged with complexities that we are now experiencing in the 21st century, this simply is too rigid. And also we are experiencing very different contexts where stakeholders are really wanting not just to be a piece of a machinery, but really be empowered and engage in creative processes. So platforms are different from pipelines because they don't have a process of input, transformation, output, solving a problem for the customer. They have an infrastructure that enables what we call platform peers, but these are individuals, organizations from the broader ecosystem, to engage with each other and co-create and often co-deliver this value to themselves. So platform as such does not solve any problems. It enables others to solve their problems by exchanging with individuals, organizations that have similar purposes. That's why it's very difficult to even get to the value proposition of the platform as a business model, because the platform as such does not have value proposition. Value proposition is defined by those who are coming from the ecosystem onto the platform to engage and co-create the value.
Thank you for explaining that. That's very succinct, and it's very important to remember that it's not there to solve the problems. That's not the aim of the platform. That's great. Thank you so much. So you also speak about meta platforms in the book, not to be confused with Facebook's new brand or new brand name. So could you go a bit more into the meta side of the platforms, please?
Yes, thank you. So as I was going through this process of discovering or rediscovering platforms, I realized that platform is not just another type of an organization or business. Not that we have, sometimes, assets, creators, distributors, or whatever other topologies we use. It's a different universe. And there's no one particular business model that we can call platform. There's a huge variety. And people have been trying to develop these typologies of platforms for a long time. It's really difficult because they are mostly starting from the perspective of the pipeline. So they're saying, okay, so there are platforms in investment, there are platforms in communications, there are platforms in technology. But what I discovered, or again, rediscovered, because I believe the platform is an ancient model, is that there is something that then I called meta, from Greek meaning beyond or transcending, meta business model. So there's something which is more generic, abstract, which says these are the main elements that would make some business a platform. But these elements has to be applied, and then this creates a variety of different business models. And I use the concept of generating system from Alexander, and there's a very good example. He says grammar is so-called generating system or meta model. So no one really applies grammar by reading a book on grammar. We apply grammar in all different kinds of ways to create conversations. So for me, this meta was really convenient, because then when you have these main elements, then you can start differentiating between pipeline and platform, and then also gives an opportunity to get into this huge variety of platforms, a specific practical applications of the meta model, most of which I strongly believe do not even exist today, that we are still to create those. So I opened up the whole new universe of this fundamentally different business model. And that also helped to go beyond the usual focus on digital platforms. So not all platforms can, need to be digital. And throughout history, most platforms were not digital. If you go back to the ancient bazaars in cities, if you go to auction houses, original educational institutions, be it, academia in ancient Athens, or being these Islamic learning hubs in Baghdad, Cordoba, Samarkand, Cairo, those were platforms, and they were not using digital technology. Digital technology basically helped us to scale, which was one of the shortcomings of platforms throughout the history. And it also has this data element that provides additional value. And of course, platforms doesn't have to be corporate. So by understanding platform as a fundamentally different universe of business models, this really helped bring clarity, but also enable better design of platforms, because majority of platforms, probably 80 to 90% of attempts to create the platforms fail. I believe platform is an amazing business model, but it's really, really hard to design and launch and sustain a successful platform. So this meta platform is basically based on 4 main minimum specifications. If you don't have all 4, I would not consider this business to be a platform. So one is that there is value co-created by the peers. So if there's no this co-creation, if there's no at least 2 minimum peer groups who are engaging and exchanging, it's most probably not a platform. That's why I often say that Netflix is not a platform, because there's no exchange happening in Netflix. Netflix is basically digital delivery of content. It's not really value co-creation, despite Netflix using data to improve customer experience. It has to be more than a network. There are so many networks, but they are not necessarily businesses. And there has to be a governance mechanism. Governance is, in recent studies, identified as the major obstacle in reaching the stage of successful platforms. So governance is often overlooked, and governance has main functions. So if you don't have onboarding, facilitation, and matchmaking, you're most probably not a platform. And platforms do not have value propositions in conventional sense, but they have a purpose, an impact. They has to be based on learning, and they always involve a community. On top of this, I realized that it's a convenient time to bring back what used to be a core subject in business and management education, which was business policy. That was before the business strategy became popular. And platforms actually are more effective when they follow a business policy rather than having a more linear and more conventional pipeline strategy, which is kind of bringing all 4 minimum specifications or elements of the meta platform together.
Thank you. Thanks for going into a really detailed explanation there. That'd be so useful for listeners. I really like what you were just saying about Netflix not being a platform. A lot of people would presume that it is. If someone says, "Oh, it's a platform business," someone go, "Oh, yeah, Netflix." So it's really important that you're, defining that and explaining that clearly. So the second half of the book, it really looks at the practical tools and methods of platforms. So what are the main elements of the platforming methodology, and what is the role of the adaptive innovation strategy?
Thank you. So just maybe to follow up on the previous conversation, because I feel, when we are talking about these concepts, it may seem a bit abstract for people who are not in the area. So as I was mentioning, I believe platforms were one of the most ancient, maybe the first business model that humanity applied. Now I gave examples of bazaars or auction houses, but also all different kind of community organizations, political and corporate assemblies. Nowadays, it's a stock exchange. Scientific laboratories could be understood or could sometimes be a business model. Shopping malls, many people understand infrastructure, if it's organized as a business, to be a platform. And that's why I think, going into a meta concept is important, is that when they hear platform as a business, they think of digital platforms, and they think of, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, Uber, Airbnb, Coursera, and others, which are, most of those are platforms, or at least they are hybrids, like Amazon. Amazon has a very substantive pipeline business in addition to its platform business. But understanding that, any organization, this is why I'm calling the book Platforms Everywhere, because I started seeing opportunities for platforms really in every single aspect of our society and economy, is important to understand that, platforms go beyond this quite limited approach, mostly coming out of Silicon Valley. So, for instance, I would consider the most successful platform of all times to be Wikipedia, which is rarely. Of course, people say Wikipedia is a platform, and of course, there's another example early on, before digital technology, was the Visa card or Visa International. So I think we need to open up the conversation, because that would then, it's not about whether we, who cares whether I say that, Netflix is a platform or not. It's important exactly because of the methodology. So if you think you are developing a platform and you are not, you will most probably fail. And this is what's happening with people thinking that, if I have an app or a website, it's a platform. And then they fail, both in terms of, success for their business, but also they fail in using the opportunity that platforms produce. So Netflix could do something like YouTube in its own way and have value being co-created on its infrastructure, but it's not doing that. It's basically just going to cinema, but this cinema is being provided to us in our homes through digital technology. And the methodology is important because we cannot stay just at the conceptual level. And I'm not saying that this methodology is kind of finalized. It's really work in progress. But I believe there are strong elements that some of those are not new. Some of the tools and methods that I propose are used elsewhere. Some are used elsewhere, but I kind of accommodated those to the particular approach I have. But I was specifically focusing on how to platform an existing organization or legacies. So you have already a business and you want to turn the whole business or part of that business into a platform. Most of the literature and most of the methodologies are focusing on startup platforms, so how to create a platform from scratch, or how to scale up existing platforms. But I saw a gap in terms of wanting to transform existing business fully or partially into a platform. And sometimes it leads to hybrids. Sometimes the whole business could be turned into a platform by opening up to the ecosystem. And that's important because oftentimes when existing organizations or businesses want to have a piece of platform in their portfolio, they just acquire an existing platform, or they digitize to some extent their business, but they are not necessarily always transforming parts of the business model into a platform. And then I'm proposing ways to do it. You can platform supplies, you can platform delivery, you can platform the operating system, and eventually you can platform the value proposition, which would turn you into a quote unquote full platform. So I'm proposing a methodology in this book which starts with guiding principles, because it's, we are talking about business design, so we cannot have overly rigid linear approaches. So guiding principles really help provide a context or scaffolding for design of platforms. For instance, the first one, there are 10 different guiding principles. The first one says that network of future platform peers should already exist. So very often platforms think that they can create a network and then bring this network onto a platform as a business. But if you look into how successful platforms emerged, there was a network which was distributed, which was not activated, and then they use this network to upgrade it onto a platform rather than just starting from scratch. Or second principle is that you have to have, third principle, minimum 2 peer roles. So if you don't have 2 different peer roles, you don't have exchange. This is what I was referencing when talking about Netflix. After these 10 guiding principles, there are 3 stages of platforming design. They're quite typical: ecosystem mapping, theory of the business development, and then the final governance, learning, and operations. And it's kind of 3 design diamonds, iterating with each other. Some are more substantive, but they come later. And this is, again, let's learn from the practice, is that you start developing systems, operating system, even if you want to do it through a digital tech, only later in the process. First, you need to really clarify who are your peers, what they're exchanging, what's the value, and what kind of channels you're using. This led to developing a very convenient tool, which I call a Platform Navigator. And that navigator is actually not, it has 4 different elements: platform design, research, teaming and policy, capability and integration, and convening and innovation. But these are not phases, because platforms are not linear design, because they're not linear business models. So you always need to iterate. You can basically, that's why I call it navigator, because it's like a compass. You can start almost at any aspect, any entry point in this navigator, but you have to cover the other one. So you can start by, bringing the team together and developing policy, or you can start by understanding what capabilities are important in the ecosystem that you want to ensure are brought onto the platform. So combining the 3 stages and the navigator, you have a really, convenient but sufficiently complex approach, each of these being supported by templates, for instance, ecosystem map or platforming canvas, and large number of additional methods and tools to ensure that there is a mixed approach. Adaptive innovation strategy cuts across all of those. So we're talking about a strategy that is built on business policy. It's about innovation, because any design of any platform is, or platforming of an existing organization is by its nature innovation, but it's adaptive. So you don't have a strategic plan and then you just follow its implementation. You are constantly modifying strategy on the go. So you have this interaction between the intention defined by the platform business policy and the circumstances in which you are engaging. So this is one of the really important aspects of the methodology, because this is exactly where platform business model is better than the pipeline to deal with really increasing complexities that we are experiencing in economies, societies, and organizations, communities. And this is why I propose that the platform business model is the model that can help us address the challenges of the 21st century.
Oh, thank you very much. So that leads to one of my further questions, actually. So is the future of business and successful business models only going to feature platforms?
This is not the argument I'm making. And I mean, I'm saying platforms everywhere, and I'm kind of advocating for the platform, but we're never gonna have like a neat ecosystem of business models where, we say all of those are the same. Unfortunately, we tended to have that with the pipeline. So almost all businesses in the past, century or two were pipelines. And actually that was part of the problems that we experience now, economic, social, environmental problems. They were always platforms. There were always certain network organizations that had an element of the business, but they were not dominant. I don't think platforms are going to become dominant, although nowadays when you look into the business model that has highest market valuation, all of them are platforms, or they claim to be platforms. I think this is a great opportunity, not only so much in the digital corporate world, but outside of it, for all different kind of organizations that basically plateaued with the pipeline model. And just to go back to Peter Drucker, when he was explaining his theory of the business, which we now call business model, he was giving an example of a German university from early 20th century. So understanding that platforms provide unique opportunities beyond just market valuation, but in bringing distributed stakeholders to co-create together and more effectively solve their own problems. I think this is the value that we should be looking in terms of platforms. I believe that we'll have more and more platforms, and there is certainly data that shows that there's a proliferation of platforms, and platforms are entering new industries like financial and infrastructure and so on. But the problem with platforms, again, going back to my main argument, is that they are understood in very limited sense. So if we continue proliferating only the platforms that leads to a rapid market valuation, this will actually be more of a challenge than the opportunity for going forwards. So if we increase the diversity of platform businesses, and of course, pipelines are always going to exist. Sometimes it's really better to be efficient and produce standardized products and services for mass market. But I think the main issue, and this is what we hear in the media, is about these platforms that already showed the dark side of platforms, because platforms tend to be monopolies. This is what makes them so powerful, but it also makes them dangerous in some ways. Some platforms are actually not platforms anymore because they start to capture and control parts of the market. Uber, by controlling the price, is a case of that. Some platforms are actually using their platform to capitalize on a regular pipeline business. I mean, Facebook, if you look into the Facebook it does not generate any profit. If you look into the Facebook platform. So Facebook sells ads, which is just in a very typical pipeline conventional industrial model of a business. So this is the ads sold, or ad space sold on Facebook that generates revenues. But if you remove this, Facebook is like Wikipedia. There's no profit. So we need to really go better understand the platforms, not only to better regulate them, but also to be able to focus more on the benefits and mitigate the dark side of it. Nowadays, it's mostly the dark side that is being in the foreground.
Thank you. You keep referring to Wikipedia as an example of a platform. So is that an example of a good platform? And do you have any examples of, again, you sort of touched on this talking about the dark side, but any examples of bad platforms?
It all depends what we mean by good or bad.
Well, successful and unsuccessful, really, yeah.
Success of the platform, and this is the tricky thing. I mean, the KPI is the metrics for success of platform, because it's so different, fundamentally different business model from the conventional one. The metrics are very different. So if you apply the metrics of the pipeline, like efficiency, that doesn't work with platforms. So this is another thing that I think we have a lot of confusion. I believe the platform is successful for as long as the platform peers co-create the value they want to co-create. So Wikipedia is and I'm using Wikipedia intentionally, not only because I think it's pretty successful, but also because it's in sharp contrast with the Silicon Valley, digital corporate platforms, because it's non-for-profit and it's not corporate. And so I'm also trying to be a bit controversial there, but Wikipedia is successful because, people forgot, but no one really understood at the beginning how that was even possible, that you co-create content that is now many times more than, Encyclopedia Britannica, just by people spending some time really writing stuff and then other editing. And it happened. So looking into why it happened on Wikipedia, I'm not getting into the financials of Wikipedia because, they have trouble. They are constantly asking us to donate. And that's why, the financial aspect of platforms is so tricky. But in terms of really delivering value for its peers, I think it was, and it still is, extremely successful. Another case that has been analyzed in literature quite a lot is Visa card which also originally was a non-for-profit global association of banks. But in terms of the kind of bad ones, or I think the bad ones are those that failed to, either platform existing organization or simply, did not get traction. And there are many of those. I don't think we have data, but probably 80-90% of attempts fail because it's so very difficult. The other category would be those that have negative economic and social impact as a part of their business model, not as a kind of a lateral result, which is Uber that has really negative economic impact, or Facebook with the impact on society.
Yeah.
And there's the third category is those that are abusing the tendency or the potential of platforms to become monopolies, again Uber, but also those that are using platform really as just a leverage point for their pipeline businesses. And this is where we get into the hybrids. And most of the platforms today actually are hybrids. Amazon and Google being the most obvious ones. Amazon with its warehouses and other pipeline businesses, Google with hardware and so on.
It's interesting, as you say. I think the hybrid is certainly more what we're used to, and what we see quite a lot of. And Amazon and Google are really good examples of that. I like how you allude to how with Wikipedia successes and profit obviously for Wikipedia, but it was groundbreaking when it came out, and I think now we're so used to Wikipedia just being there that it's we've almost forgot how different it was, how new it was, rather than having large encyclopedias in your home, or you had to find that information from the library. So it's really interesting. Thank you so much. So that concludes our talk today. So thank you for joining me. The book Platforms Everywhere is available, and there will be a link within the transcripts that goes with this podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd like to thank you, Ned, for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to this podcast, and thank you to my guest, Ned Rava. I also like to thank the team at This Is Distorted for producing and editing this podcast.